Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Riley Weldon. I'm the Manager of Planning Services here for the town of Cochrane. Today, I'm joined by members of our consultant team from Urban Systems, Leighton Ginther and Chris Nelson. Today, we're going to be speaking to Cochrane's corridor plan, and it will provide a bit of the background of the corridor plan to you. So the agenda today is we're gonna go through a couple different things, starting with the why and the what, basically the approach of the corridor plan itself. We're going to get into each one of the corridors. There's four: the Fifth Avenue, Railway Street, River Avenue, and Griffin Road. So you'll have the opportunity to learn more about what is planned for each one of those corridors. We will then talk about the current process and the steps moving forward. And at the end, we would normally have some discussion, but because this is a recorded webinar, we will just wrap it up at the end. So I will now pass it over to Chris Nelson, and he will talk to the why and the what.
Yeah, thanks, Riley. Hope this video finds everybody doing well. We're excited to obviously speak to it today. So why a corridor plan? You know, in alignment with the Cochrane's community vision, the corridor plan is focused on contributing to a dynamic downtown that's highly connected, livable, and thriving. The intent of the corridor plan is to create a long-term vision for Fifth Avenue, Railway Street, River Ave, and Griffin Road. Each of these corridors are unique and are currently experiencing development pressures. As many might be aware, the town is also making some significant investments in the downtown to improve the connectivity, support economic development, and continue to improve the high level of service for residents and businesses. As redevelopment and investments continue to occur in the downtown, it's critical that relationships between these future land uses, the built form, and adjacent corridors are considered, and the improvements support the town's long-term vision. So what is a corridor plan? It's an aspirational document. It outlines how streets can function to meet the broader community objectives. It provides direction and expectations for development and decision-making along these corridors. What the corridor plan is not, though, it's not a detailed design. It's not plans or detailed plans for each corridor. It's not capital forecasting for implementation for each of these corridors. And it's not a phasing plan and or mandatory checklist. It's really intended to set a vision, create inspiration, and create dialogue between town, future development opportunities, and future investments along each of these corridors to make sure everything's in sync. The approach that we took to create the corridor plan had many steps, and the project kicked off sometime ago in July 2019 with an initial focus on understanding the corridors. It focused on researching best practices and preparing project materials for public outreach. Later in the summer of 2019, there was extensive public engagement held. There was an online survey that many watching this and listening may have participated in. We received over 500 responses to that survey. There was also some public pop-up engagement, along each of the four corridors, and a presence at Spray Lakes Rec Center and the night market that, again, folks might have seen and or participated in. Following the engagement, visions were created for each of these corridors in draft. There was a gap in timing, obviously, as everyone would be aware, as COVID took hold. The project has since been relaunched this last month, and we're excited to be reporting back now those visions to the community. There's a couple key anchors or parameters that obviously we looked at and discussed with folks along the way. And one of them was how corridors function. You know, streets are some of the most important public spaces in town. They play critical roles that contribute to the health, success, and strength of our community. In general, corridors function on a spectrum. They can be links between places, focused on moving goods and people efficiently between destinations. On the other side of the spectrum, corridors can be viewed as spaces for people to enjoy and spend their time, creating destinations unto themselves. But regardless of where corridors land on the spectrum, it's critical to view these streets as vital public spaces, highlighting the importance, again, of defining the community's long-term visions and aspirations for these corridors. Elements are another piece that we looked at for each of these different corridors. And regardless of the function of the corridor, These elements help bring these corridors to life. They make them vibrant. There's different types of elements, and they might fit well with every corridor or just pieces of corridors. Elements like an active interface creates a visual engagement between individuals on the street and those on the ground floor within buildings. Accessibility ensures that the physical environment is comfortable for everyone to navigate, regardless of age or ability. Corridors that accommodate multiple modes, the ability to safely experience corridors while walking, riding a bike, or on transit or in a car. Other elements include safety. Users feel welcome and able to use the space throughout the day or night. There's multiple reasons to be along a corridor can support a wide variety of activities, events, and land uses, for example. And the last one here to speak to would be comfort. That everyone along the corridor, enjoys the corridor and it's easy to use. So those are different elements of vibrancy and bringing those corridors to life. And along with the function and different elements, those are a number of different pieces that we looked at when we were reviewing the 4 corridors that we're talking about today. And with that, I'll pass over to Leighton Ginther to speak to each of the 4 different corridors.
Thanks, Chris. As mentioned, we'll be focusing on 4 different corridors: Fifth Avenue, Railway Street, River Avenue, and Griffin Road. So Fifth Avenue, for each corridor, we've undertaken some analysis, and you can see based on the map in front of you that this corridor is about just over 1 kilometer in length. You can see that sidewalks about 2,200 meters. So sidewalks largely on both sides of the corridor. If we were to calculate the total area of this corridor, it'd work out to be about 6 acres. The corridor averages about 20 meters in width and carries approximately 6,000 to 13,000 vehicles per day. You can see on the top right-hand corner the current modal split. So that basically describes how people move along the corridor. So over 90% would be passenger vehicles, about 6% would walk, 2% would bike, and 1% would be commercial vehicles. So in looking at each of these corridors, we also examined the existing policy that's currently in place. So Connecting Cochrane, which is Cochrane's transportation master plan, identifies that corridors, this corridor particularly, Fifth, is a primary collector and will have up to 4 travel lanes. The Integrated Downtown Action Plan is the plan that governs sort of the actions around downtown investments. And so that plan acknowledges the need for streetscape improvements to create more pedestrian-friendly corridors to accommodate cycling and to provide additional pedestrian crossings. The plan also encourages development to move closer to the corridor and be oriented to the street to create a stronger relationship and greater comfort and safety for pedestrians. The land use bylaw is a bylaw that regulates and controls the use of parcels within the town. And this land use bylaw is currently under review, and some of the direction that's being provided that relates to this plan would be, some examples would be no parking in the front yard abutting a street. Building entrances need to be oriented to the street and have things like canopies and awnings that would provide comfort and protection against the weather for pedestrians. And then including facades that have about 50% glazing, and by that we mean transparency or windows that allow people inside a building to see what's happening on the street, and people on the street to see what's happening in buildings, creating stronger relationship and greater pedestrian interest. And then finally, buildings taller than 3 stories must be stepped back. So anything above 3 stories, that structure needs to be set back away from the street, just to, once again, create a more comfortable environment for pedestrians. And finally, as you might be aware, the town follows the Western Heritage Design Guidelines that were developed about 20 years ago, but provides direction and guidance towards achieving a Western heritage, both in building and site design. So as part of the exercise, has already been described, we went out to the public, we connected with stakeholders, we connected with business owners along each corridor, and we asked them a number of questions related to the reason for travel. And we asked them what's their primary reason for travel, And you can see that almost half the people responding indicated that on Fifth, it's to run errands and to get to access to other amenities, whereas just over 20% indicated that it's more for a social experience or to engage in social connections with others. We also asked people how well does Fifth perform as a link, and Chris referred to links and people places. 40% indicated that in terms of functioning as an efficient link, it was good or slightly efficient, and just under 40% indicated that as a people place, it was more or less okay. And you can see in the top right-hand corner of the slide that some of the comments that we heard from participants included corridor seems to be very vehicle oriented. There appears to be a lack of vibrancy. Buildings back onto the corridor and don't engage the street. It's not very interesting or inviting were some of the comments that we heard. So this is a picture of one segment of the corridor. And so we've just highlighted a number of pieces that jumped out to us. So you can see that there's a narrow sidewalk kind of in the center of the image. And that sidewalk is right up against traffic and the corridor itself. And so we think that that inhibits pedestrian accessibility, comfort, and safety. On the right-hand side, you can see that buildings tend to be oriented towards the parking areas, and they tend to be separated from the street itself, which reduces that corridor activity and vibrancy. And from our perspective, there seems to be a few reasons to use this corridor, except if you're moving from point A to point B. And so along the bottom, you'll notice that the spectrum that Chris introduced earlier, we would see this corridor functioning, Fifth functioning more on the left-hand side of that spectrum, functioning more as a link. In looking at what's possible, we've highlighted a number of pieces here, and you can see that there's obviously we've added some development on both sides of the corridor, some intensity, but some of the pieces that we wanted to point out is just including active uses at ground level. So on the left-hand side that you can see a building that's got windows that would speak to that 50% glazing regulation in the land use bylaw. We believe that that improves pedestrian interest and safety. We've created a widened sidewalk that allows people to move freely and improves pedestrian comfort and walkability. And we've also separated that sidewalk from the moving traffic, in this case with a planted boulevard that not only provides some visual amenity, but also provides some separation and increased safety for pedestrians. And then on the other side of the corridor, we've simply indicated that as redevelopment happens, or that there could be opportunities to encourage things like outdoor patios and seating to bring additional life and vitality to the corridor. So as we contemplate how this corridor could function in the future, we see moving towards the right on the spectrum, moving towards more of a people place. The second corridor is Railway Street. And similarly to the exercise or the image that we showed earlier, you'll see in this case, Railway Street, similar length to Fifth, but it doesn't have the same length of sidewalks, about 630 meters of sidewalks. If we were to calculate the total area of this corridor, it would work out to be about 6 acres. And the width of the corridor varies fairly significantly across the length of the corridor, from 15 to 23 meters. It handles a little bit less traffic than what Fifth does at 7,500 vehicles per day, but a very similar modal split at 90% vehicles, 6% walking, 4% cycling, and 1% commercial vehicles. So in terms of the policy context that has influenced this corridor, Connecting Cochrane once again recommends that there be continuous sidewalks on both sides of the street, and recommends that bike lanes be constructed from Center Ave all the way to Highway 22, recognizing that this is a really important east-west connection, and it could be very important for cyclists as well. The Downtown Action Plan talks about a number of developments along this corridor: the closure of 4th, the CP Rail pedestrian crossing, continued redevelopment of the quarry site, and improved connectivity were all anticipated to encourage redevelopment and intensity of uses along this corridor. And similarly, the land use bylaw is contemplating prohibiting parking in the front yard abutting a street, and that ensuring that building entrances face that street, that there's glazing and transparency to engage pedestrians, and that more intensive development is stepped back to create a comfortable environment for pedestrians. And similarly, the Western Heritage Design Guidelines would apply to development along this corridor. In engaging stakeholders and public, we heard some similar sentiment that this corridor is predominantly used to access, to run errands and to access other amenities. 20% of people responding indicated that they use this corridor to find parking. And roughly about 50% indicated that the corridor is good in terms of an efficient link, and just under 40% said it's more or less okay as a people place. You can see some of the comments around it appears unfinished, it lacks sidewalks, bike lanes would be great. Transit hub will be an important corridor to set sort of the precedent for redevelopment. It's got significant redevelopment potential, and the opportunity to prioritize pedestrian bikes and assortment of other comments we collected. So a snapshot of this corridor just across from the future transit hub, you can see once again that we've got narrow sidewalks that inhibit pedestrian accessibility and comfort. The sidewalks are separated from the sidewalk or from the road itself and traveling vehicles, which is positive. You can see that there's little to experience as it stands right now. Along this segment of the corridor for pedestrians, overhead utilities are fairly visible and sort of influence that visual character of the corridor. So we would classify this as being more on the link side of the spectrum currently. So looking more forward into the future, we think that there's a tremendous opportunity, as many people have identified and commented on, to see redevelopment that would take place close to the sidewalk, would be relocated and adjacent to the sidewalk to create that pedestrian interest and safety and enhance the vibrancy along the corridor. We want to ensure that those facilities are universally accessible so that everyone, regardless of mobility or regardless of age or ability, have the ability to access the corridor and use it comfortably. Residential development above retail increases the local market within walking distance, support local business, and once again adds to that vitality of the corridor. You can see that we have dedicated cycling facilities that are on street, and it's probably, in our minds, it's really important that this corridor accommodate multiple modes of transportation, given the transit hub and how that will function as a hub, moving people between different modes of transportation, from pedestrians to transit to cycling to those driving as well. So we see the opportunity for this corridor to move once again towards more of a people place, in addition to continuing to support the movement of vehicles. River Avenue. So you'll notice that River Avenue we broke into two pieces, but in its entirety, you'll see that it's over 2 kilometers in length. Sidewalks are fairly periodic at 577 meters. Works out to be about a 10-acre area in total size, and a fairly consistent corridor width at 20 meters, handling roughly 2,000 to 5,000 vehicles per day. Slightly different modal split, with a little bit lower at 88% being passenger vehicles, and then split 5% both for walking and cycling, and 1% for commercial vehicles. So the policy context that applies to River, Connecting Cochrane talks about recommending continuity of sidewalks, so extending sidewalks along River Avenue north of Griffin, and it also recommends bike lanes on River Avenue south of Griffin. And it really underscores the importance of River Avenue as a key recreation commuting corridor that links downtown and the east end of the neighborhood to the Bow River itself. The integrated action plan for the downtown talks about the importance of enhancing River Avenue to improve the visual and physical connection to the Bow River itself. And then the land use bylaw speaks to prohibiting parking and loading or outdoor display areas in the front yards of development abutting a street. And that in some cases, landscaping may be required in those front yards abutting a street. And once again, the Western Heritage Design Guidelines would apply to development along this corridor. So we heard people's primary reason for traveling this corridor, 42% to run errands, but 18% indicated to access recreation, which is an important piece to this corridor. 39% said that it's neutral in terms of functioning as an efficient link. Could be better, could be worse. And 39% indicated that it's more or less okay as a people place. But some of the comments were important access to the river for sure, unsafe access to and from businesses. We heard a lot of that, especially in the north side of river, no sense of place, it's noisy, there's lots of traffic, there's numerous private access points were all comments that we heard through the process. So if we look at the north part of Griffin to start with, you can see that one of our primary observations and what we definitely heard from businesses along the corridor is that the corridor is difficult to safely navigate regardless of mode of travel. If you're a pedestrian, if you're a cyclist or a vehicle, it's difficult to move along this corridor given the number of private driveways and the amount of on and off street parking. And our observation is that some of the on-street parking capacity has been reduced by the number of private access points and the frequent private driveways. Then we also notice that there's a significant grass boulevard on the left side of your image that provides little visual amenity or functional value to this corridor. And so we would say that this would largely function as a link currently. So in thinking about the future of River Avenue north of Griffin, we think that there's an opportunity to widen the surface a little bit wider so that we can accommodate 2 travel lanes, 2 parking lanes in both directions, and on-street bike facilities, which you'll remember is slightly different than what Connecting Cochrane had talked about, but we believe that it's really important in terms of linking the East End neighborhood, the downtown, to the river, to one of the town's most significant natural features. We think it's important to maintain this connectivity for cyclists and an overall network. And so we've suggested that we widen the corridor within the right-of-way to do that. We would want to maintain on-street parking to meet short-term visitor parking needs of adjacent businesses, totally recognize that. But we think there's an opportunity to improve the walkability, safety, and amount of on-street parking by reducing and potentially consolidating the number of driveways. And obviously that means working with local business to think about what are those alternatives so that we can continue to provide parking that's required to meet need, to support business while doing it in a way that hopefully is safer and more convenient and easier to navigate. So we see this corridor moving as well towards more of a balance between link and people place. If we jump to the other side of Griffin and staying on river, this is the current situation. You can see that we've got residential uses up against the corridor, but they tend to back onto the corridor, which reduces the strength of that relationship between a built form and the corridor itself, and limiting perhaps the interaction between residents and people passing along on the sidewalk. Cyclists in this case need to ride along the surface of the road with traffic, limiting potentially the amount of recreational users that might use the corridor. And then given what's happening on the other side, currently undeveloped, there's an opportunity to influence the form of development so that it contributes to the character and functionality of the street for all users. So we would see this corridor functioning largely as a link currently. When thinking about the possibilities going forward, you can see that we're suggesting that there be on-street cycling facilities just to create that connection, as has been supported and indicated in other policy documents, just to link the downtown to the Bow River and the amenity that the Bow River is. We'd want to ensure that sidewalks are wide enough for users to walk, wheel side by side, and to maintain conversations. And we would hope that on the other side of the development, as redevelopment occurs, that development would front the corridor, improving pedestrian comfort, safety, and community interaction. So we think this corridor could also function as more of a people place and move right on the spectrum going forward. Finally, Griffin Road is the last corridor that we'll cover. And Griffin Road is the longest of all the corridors, as you would know, more than 3 kilometers in length. About half of that, you've got about 1,500 meters of sidewalk. It's 16 acres in size, fairly consistent corridor width at 20 meters, and handles a similar amount of volume to 5th Avenue at 6,000 to 11,000 vehicles per day. As you would expect, high percentage of passenger vehicles at 95%, and 1% walking, 2% cycling, and then 2% commercial vehicle traffic, which would be no surprise. The policy that relates to Griffin, Connecting Cochrane, has identified it as an arterial road that will carry 4 travel lanes with the median sidewalks and bike lanes. The integrated downtown action plan anticipates significant redevelopment potential along this corridor, and being an important corridor given proximity to the downtown and the Bow River. land use bylaw indicating that no parking or loading or outdoor display would be permitted in the front yard of development, and that landscaping may be required to soften those front yards in some cases. And then once again, the Western Heritage Design Guidelines would apply to development along this corridor. So when asked similar questions, we had feedback from people indicating that 33% of individuals accessing and utilizing the corridor were using it to run errands and access amenities, 30% access recreation, which would be no surprise with the Spray Lakes Rec Center at the end of Griffin. People indicated that 47% felt like it was a good and efficient link or slightly efficient. 38% said bad, but it's not awful in terms of a people place. And some of the feedback that we had was that it's fast, it's noisy and busy, but it does provide direct and convenient vehicular access to many businesses and industry within the town of Cochrane. Feels old and needs an update. So looking at one segment of the corridor, you can definitely recognize that doesn't have the same kind of pedestrian facilities as some of the other corridors that we looked at. And so with those limited facilities, definitely limits who can access and move along those corridors safely and comfortably. The narrow shoulder and fast moving traffic means probably only more confident riders are using this corridor as cyclists, but there is definitely an opportunity to influence the form of future development so that it can contribute to the corridor, to the functionality and comfort of the corridor. So as it stands now, we would say this corridor largely functions as a link. In looking to the future and what might be possible, we've suggested that there be, similar to the connecting Cochrane, that there be bike lanes included on the street to accommodate a wide range of existing and future mobility, and that facilities be formalized to create direct connections for people using different modes of transportation, that we would limit vehicular access primarily to intersections, and that we would create a center median to just provide a visual break and a little bit of a green break between the 4 lanes of traffic, and that we would have things like street trees just to reinforce the significance of this corridor as an important corridor within the community. So we think there's an opportunity that Griffin Road itself could be able to move between more of a link to a people place. I'll pass it over to Riley, who can speak to sort of the process, where we're at right now, and what some of those next steps might be.
Thanks very much, Leighton. So as previously discussed earlier in the presentation, the process for the corridor plan began in 2019, actually the summer of 2019. And it did begin with a bit of research into each of the corridors, and an engagement plan was created and initiated in the summer. It began with an online survey that was taken, excuse me, sorry. It started with an online survey in the summer that had quite a good response. As you can see, we had nearly 500 responses from the public and from the stakeholders. We also went out to each of the different corridors and met with people that were actually on the corridors. So these were the pop-up engagement events. Again, we had quite a good turnout and met with over 100 people as they were passing by. We also had a council workshop in the fall, and this also included a site visit to each of the corridors, so council could see firsthand what was happening on each of the different corridors. Moving forward here in 2021, we did relaunch the project after a brief somewhat brief pause due to the COVID-19 pandemic, and that was all of basically all of 2020. We did relaunch here in May of this year, and we wanted to re-engage with both the public and a lot of the landowners and stakeholders on each of the corridors. We do have an online survey that is currently on our Let's Talk Cochrane website for the corridor plan. This is up and has been up since June 14th. And thank you to all of those people that have already filled out the survey. This will still continue to be up here for the next week. We are recording the webinar here today, so that provides the opportunity for people to learn a little bit more about what the corridor plan is and what has taken place in terms of the work so far. So that really is the current process. We will be moving forward to a non-statutory or a public hearing on June 12th. This will provide the opportunity for you and other members of the public to come to council to either hear the comments that have been provided, or to speak directly and provide comments directly to council yourself. And that'll happen at the June 12th council meeting. I'd like to thank you very much for taking the time to watch the webinar here today. We really do appreciate your interest in this. Yeah, if you are interested in learning a little bit more or have not had the opportunity to take the survey, please do visit our Let's Talk Cochrane website, which is letstalkcochrane.ca. And you can look for the corridor plan icon, and you can find out more about the corridor plan and take the survey there. So again, thank you very much, and I wish you a good day.